Davis here at ABC News headquarters. We're coming on the air now with some breaking news. President Trump is expected to be discharged from Walter Reed Medical Center within just moments. It's not the first time that he's left the hospital since he checked in on Friday night. There you see the president walking down the steps, approaching the podium. He's expected to make a comment before the media.
How many of your staff are sick? Thank you very much. Thank you. Do you think you might be a super spreader, Mr. President?
We think that he's about to speak in front of the cameras in just a moment as he's walking out, being asked some questions by reporters. Oh, and just giving a thumbs up and a little fist there and just getting right into the motorcade. We're expecting him in just a little while to board Marine One for the roughly 10-minute trip to the White House. Of course, yesterday the president went for a ride in his motorcade to wave to supporters, something that he's been widely criticized for. But this time, he's not leaving for a joyride, but to make that return to his home at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I believe that Marine One is actually in the area. There's Marine One standing by at this moment. We were expecting that he was going to get on Marine One, but we'll see. And let's bring in Terry Moran. Terry, first, I just want to kind of get to the tweet, because we heard the announcement that he was going to be leaving the hospital today from the president, true to form, in a tweet. And he said, "I'll be leaving the great Walter Reed Medical Center today at 6:30 p.m. feeling really good. Don't be afraid of COVID. Don't let it dominate your life. We have developed under the Trump administration some really great drugs and knowledge. I feel better than I did 20 years ago, exclamation point." Terry, we see him still downplaying the seriousness of coronavirus. Your reaction to that tweet and the developments today?
Well, from a public health standpoint, it's appalling. It's appalling for the President of the United States in dealing with a pandemic that has killed at least 210,000 Americans. Think of all that suffering. It's one of the great mass casualty events in American history, and there's no end in sight at this point, although he claims there is. It is consistent, however, politically and personally with what he's done from the beginning. He told Bob Woodward, "I like to downplay it." He likes to wish it away. He said it would go away miraculously. And now that it has come to him that he is an infectious agent walking down those stairs right now, and that his White House is a super spreading scene, his attitude as well is not that bad. I'm fine, although his own doctors say he's not out of the woods yet. It is the pitch that he is making to voters. I beat it. We can do it together. That's his cheerleading attitude. But Republicans are bailing. Even Senator John Cornyn of Texas, Republican of Texas, one of his most loyal supporters, in an election that is far closer than a Republican senior senator in Texas expected, is bailing on the president. He's saying, well, you know, he got way out over his skis. He probably didn't take it seriously enough. When you see that, when you see those chinks in the wall, you see that this pitch that the president is making, summarized in that tweet that he's had from the beginning, that is not that big of a deal, is really runs serious political risks, but more importantly, could kill people.
And his doctor telling the press just a few hours ago, right before he was discharged, that President Trump may not be entirely out of the woods just yet, but also saying that nothing can be done at Walter Reed that cannot be done at the White House. And speaking of the White House, where he's about to return, ABC News has now confirmed 18 people who have been on the grounds or in contact with the president have now tested positive for coronavirus, including just today 3 members of his staff, including the White House press secretary. Many of those infected attended the Rose Garden event on September 26th to announce, of course, Amy Coney Barrett as Trump's Supreme Court nominee. See President Trump there now, getting ready to board Marine One. But it's kind of set the stage for us of the White House that he's about to return to, as far as the spread of this maybe potentially a hot spot there at the White House and the kind of danger that it may put staff in.
It is a hot spot. If it happened in this building I'm sitting in, or in the building you're sitting in, that 18 people tested positive for coronavirus, it'd probably be shut down. People wouldn't be allowed to be here. Now, the White House is special because it's the White House and it's the seat of the executive branch in the American government, and so people have to go there. But the cavalier way that this has been handled, I've been to the White House, plenty over the course of this pandemic, and you can see it. Nobody wears masks. It's almost a badge of honor that they don't wear masks. The problem for the president and for his party politically is that not only is this very dangerous to the public health and private health of people who are going to the White House, but he's essentially asking to be rehired. And the number one job he's had to do in the eyes of Americans is manage this pandemic. And his own workplace is a contagion. And that is not a particularly powerful argument to take to the voters. Now, he's going to make it, saying that, we're bold, we're in the battle, we can beat it. But it is hard when it is clear to the majority of Americans, polls show, that he has done a poor job.
And you can see we're still waiting for Marine One to take off and again make that roughly 10-minute trip back to the White House. Kira Phillips, I want to bring you in. I know you talked to White House staff today. What did they tell you?
They're not happy. I'll tell you that. They're not happy at all. And when I was there at the end of last week, I was tested and it was negative. And that's when I actually made contact with the president at one of his departures. And it was the next day we found out that he tested positive. When I was there last week, it's exactly what Terry said. All the journalists, we're pretty darn strict about wearing those masks. It's a policy, and everybody calls each other out when they don't have that mask on. But still, you don't see the president's staff wearing masks. Very rarely do you see them wearing masks. And so it does fit that sort of attitude that the president has been carrying on with. And here's what's just surprised me just now is that I'm shocked the president didn't say anything. I'm surprised he didn't make any kind of comment. That's very unusual for him because he was tweeting like crazy today, tweeting about the election and then tweeting how great he feels and he's ready to come home. So back to the mood with inside the White House, they're upset. They don't want to come to work. A number of people I talked to among those who deal with the press and work in the area where we come into. And also something else I want to point out, that when his doctor, Sean Conley, talked today in front of Walter Reed, he said, we're sort of looking at where he's going to be able to walk around and where he's going to work. It didn't even sound like there was a set game plan as to where he could roam within the residence, if indeed he can roam, and where he's going to work, and is he going to go into the Oval Office, and will he interact with his staff? So again, talking to those that work within the White House, there are a lot of people that are scared to come to work, don't want to come to work, and they're not real happy with the president right now. And it'll be interesting to see if indeed...
Here, I'm just going to break up just for 1 second, interrupt you. I apologize. Yeah, Marine One is just taking off the tarmac there, heading to the White House right now. Again, just a very quick ride to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But I do want to get back to you, to Kira, because so you were there Wednesday, right? And then when the White House realized that President Trump had tested positive at some point, and we're not exactly sure because despite the fact that the doctor was asked multiple times when was the last time that he tested negative, he would not give that answer. Have you been contacted at any time by the White House as part of the contact tracing?
No, I wasn't. And that is exactly what another White House correspondent for the New York Times actually said in an interview, that and he tested positive, that he was not contacted either. So there's a bit of, it's a contradictory message here, because while we're hearing that they are doing the contact tracing, if you follow up with those who have been testing positive, and I tested negative, I didn't get a call, but those testing positive, they didn't get a call either. And there's a number of those individuals coming forward and talking about that. By the way, this is a pretty extraordinary picture. Very rarely do you see images like this, Lindsay, of Marine One. You know, when you see the formation of the various helicopters and the president is en route to and from his events and to and from the White House, you know, for security reasons, you don't see this. So it's pretty remarkable that we are watching live coverage of the president there in his helicopter heading back actually to the White House. And you can see also the side choppers there next to him. But, you know, when he tweeted out, "Don't be afraid, don't let it dominate your life," I think that a lot of Americans, Lindsay, were hoping that the president, that this would be a wake-up call, that the president would say, wow, hundreds of thousands of people have died. I got it. I was here at Walter Reed. I saw how this felt, what had to happen. Yes, I'm privileged here. I get experimental treatments. I get care that most Americans don't get. I'm a really lucky human being. But he didn't say any of that. And it was, I'm feeling great. And he's doing videos. And he's saying how he can't wait to get out of there. And he's learned a lot. It's been like school for him. But where was the true compassion? I got this. And it was awful. And wow, I feel an empathy that I didn't feel before. And we didn't get that from the President of the United States so far, Lindsay.
And you're right, Kira, that there was an expectation that many people were expecting the president to talk to America before he actually boarded Marine One and got back to the White House. And again, no mention, as you said, of the world-class medical care that he's been receiving. I want to bring in John Santucci. John, there are reports that his family was actually encouraging him to stay at the hospital. Have you gotten that sense?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've heard from multiple sources close to the family that echo what Kira was just saying about, you know, people nervous about this return. They want him to get the care he needs. And the reality is that, look, Donald Trump, like most older men in their 70s, beat to the sound of their own drum. And I think it's going to be really curious, Lindsay, if Donald Trump is actually going to stay in quarantine. You know, how are they going to keep him, you know, restrained, if you will? I mean, not tying him up, but keeping him on his side of the White House. I mean, we know right now Melania Trump, the First Lady, is in quarantine. We know that there's the couple's son, Barron, who tested negative late last week, has been quarantining away from his mom simply because he does not want to get infected, neither do his parents. But this is going to be tough right now. And you see Trump's Twitter feed saying he wants to get on the campaign trail, wants to get out there. Right now, if you do the proper CDC guidelines, he tested positive late last week. The 14 days from that brings you to October 15th, just about. And, of course, October 15th right now, Lindsay, slated to be the second presidential debate.
And what can you tell us, John, about the climate inside the White House? Because, you know, again, we were hearing that aides are anxious. There was a, quote, a full-blown freak out, and that there are workplace changes that are underway as well.
Yeah, a senior source of mine is actually the one that said full-blown freak out, and it's totally spot on. I've spoken to almost a dozen administration sources today alone, and frankly, it was sort of at first the slow reaction to Kayleigh McEnary, the White House press secretary, testing positive is, oh, my God, what happened? And then the fact that two of her deputies came out, I couldn't put my phone down without it constantly vibrating on our kitchen table. The sheer panic amongst White House officials. And you have to remember also, Lindsay, that, look, think about any workplace in America right now. You're wearing masks. You're social distancing. You can't enter our headquarters of ABC News without wearing a mask. We're taking proper precautions not only to protect ourselves, but to protect our colleagues. But at the White House, wearing a mask, you were almost shamed for doing so. It was like, what are you doing? I mean, people would gather in big meetings, offices. They would cram on to Marine One, the president's helicopter, which we're currently watching fly back to the White House, and get on Air Force One. I mean, think about it, Lindsay. Most Americans that do have to travel for work or for personal reasons right now, getting on an airplane, have to wear a mask when they get on board. If you're boarding Air Force One under Donald Trump's administration, no such requirement.
And again, we're just replaying the video of President Trump walking out of Walter Reed Medical Center with his mask on, kind of holding on to the guardrails as he was making his way down the steps. Matthew Dow, I'd like to bring you in here. I mean, happening and playing out before our eyes during any time would be really, I guess, unprecedented, maybe in so many ways. But the fact that this is actually taking place during an election year with less than 30 days left until the election, how do you put that all in perspective?
Well, the fascinating part is millions of people have already voted, actually, and were voting while the president was in the hospital. So November 3rd isn't actually Election Day. November 3rd is the last day to vote, because most of the country will have voted in this time period between now and a few days before Election Day, with the rest voting on Election Day. We've never seen this before, obviously. To me, the president went into that debate, which seems like 10 years ago, last week, behind Joe Biden, significantly, but a margin he could probably cut. Every poll after that debate pretty much panned the president's performance at that debate. Then the president, it's discovered, and we find out he's tested positive for COVID. He goes in the hospital. And in the aftermath, we've seen now a couple of polls in the last 24 hours that the president has actually fallen even further. So he fell after the debate.
And Matt, I'm going to interrupt just 1 second just to establish Marine One back now landing at the White House. But continue. We're talking about the polls, what the polls have found.
Sure. Sure, and it's because the country looks at this, and one side they say, I have compassion for the president and the first lady, hope they recover. But at the other side, they're very angry about the irresponsibility of how the president's conducted himself. And the tweet you talked about at the beginning, where the president said, you know, don't be afraid, and I feel 20 years younger, is just at best tone deaf and willfully ignorant about what the reality is, and at worst is heartless and dangerous in this. And that's how the country sees this. The country is going about all of these protocols, doing all the thing, and watching a president that didn't seem to care. And he gets it, and there was a hope that he would have some empathy, as Kira said, and some compassion. But it doesn't seem to have touched him at all in a way to feel like what's happened to 8 million people in this country that have contracted it, and what's happened to the 210,000 families that have been affected by a death from this. And so all of that, as Joe Biden goes out on the trail, and as the president does this, the president continues to fall further and further behind, primarily driven by how he has not dealt with this pandemic.
I want to bring Terry Moran back in, our resident historian. Terry, as you're watching Marine One just land there on the lawn at the White House, give us your read and reaction as we, in a few moments, see President Trump return back inside.
Well, Lindsay, the history of presidents and health is one that has a tradition of presidents wanting to guard negative information about their health. Dwight Eisenhower had a gigantic heart attack that almost killed him in 1957, I believe it was. He spent 6 weeks in a hospital in Colorado. That's how weak he was, and did not want to share much information at all. John Kennedy, we know now, kept secret lots of information. He was a very sick man in some ways, and was taking all kinds of pills to cover it up. Woodrow Wilson obviously had a stroke that disabled him, and he was kept, information about that was kept from the American people. Presidents understand that the power of that executive office resides in them alone, and they are jealous of it. They are concerned not just for their own exercise of that power, but so that it's not diminished going forward. But President Trump, while in keeping with that tradition, is also making sure that we don't find out basic information. When was his last negative test? That's critical, perhaps, to the lives of people who might have come in contact with those who are now positive. And just to explain the reason that contact tracing is so important is you want to cut off those chains of transmission, because it's not just the people who were at the White House, like Kira, I've been there, and others, but it is the people with whom we would come in contact if, in fact, we were infected. And just as an example of that, you may have heard of the super spreading wedding in Maine. No one at that wedding actually died, but 7 people died down those chains of transmission. So this callousness about sharing information, the callousness about, no, we aren't really going to contact trace, we're going to talk to Cure, we're going to talk to the New York Times reporter who actually is tested positive. He's waiting for a call so they go through who he's been in contact with. That is something that could well cost lives down the road. But Donald Trump, from the beginning, he doesn't like bad news, doesn't like bad news about his health, he doesn't like bad news about anything. He'll either spin it away or ignore it, or frankly, as he said, let's test less, let's contact trace less. That is what the White House is doing right now, and it's more than politics here. It's life and death.
It looks like someone's walking up the stairs trying to determine if that's the president already back up and off of Marine One. Dr. Todd Eller, I'd like to bring you in just to piggyback off of what Terry Moran was just saying, because as we watched that briefing from the president's doctor today, and he was refusing, despite multiple questions from reporters about when the president last had a negative COVID test. He refused to answer. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I think this is really important. When you talk about crisis communication, one of the most important aspects of this is accurate, transparent information. And, you know, when we think about from the beginning with this pandemic, there have been mixed messages when it comes to hydroxychloroquine, mixed messages when it comes to the importance of masking, same about who should be tested, and now with, you know, the president's health. So I think it's really, this doesn't just affect the president. Obviously, this is a potential super spreading event. There are a lot of people exposed. It's really important that we hear about, you know, all of these details. When were the onset of symptoms? When did he last test negative? When did he first test positive? These are important facets, not just for him, but really for the close contacts, because as we just heard, you know, lives are at stake here. And remember, you know, the U.S. has the most number of global cases and deaths in the world. And currently, we've heard that we're close to 50,000 cases a day, and winter is coming. We're not in a good place right now.
And it looks like the president is, well, he is for sure standing there among the flags. It appears that he's not wearing a mask at this moment. Going to go to you, John, in 1 second, but just want to stay with the doctor for once. Give me a sense of, you know, how much of a critical period this is. If we were talking about just any other 74-year-old male who's an overweight patient and the potential for a rapid decline.
Right. I mean, what we've seen about this is the average incubation period with COVID-19 is roughly 5 days. But from the onset of symptoms, most people do well. But when you talk about the people who turn for the worse and have that inflammatory storm, that typically happens roughly a week after the onset of symptoms. So if the president's symptoms began around Thursday or something, we're still not at that average place when people can take a turn for the worse. Now, remember, most people do well, and my hope is that the president has a speedy recovery. But these next few days are going to be very important. He has to be watched closely.
Kira, give us a sense of what you just saw there, because we saw him go through the top floor. It sounds like he normally would enter through the ground floor.
Exactly. That's the area actually where we usually get them on departures and arrivals. And you'll see that Marine One lands, he steps out, and he usually walks through the bottom doors, goes in and out of the bottom doors. And he usually stops and he talks to everybody. So what I thought was interesting is he didn't. I was talking to somebody there on the ground, texting with them in real time. And he did not talk to anybody, but he walked up the stairs and stood there and waved. So it was you know, a typical Trump presidential moment, like, hi, I'm here, I'm up top, I'm in charge, I feel good, I'm looking good, and then he disappears through the doors. So clearly a planned photo op, and he didn't stop to say anything. And I'm telling you, this all goes back to it's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out, because this is it's so typical, but it's not. He always talks and he's not talking, but he's putting himself out there in ways like everything is fine, and it sends such a strange and kind of harsh, lack of compassion. I mean, there's so many words going through my mind right now, because this is the moment where he should be so humble and so, I get it, I'm sorry, and I've been there with you, and just keep it quiet and on the down low. And all day today he's tweeting about the election, and prolifically, and it's just like, I got COVID, I went for some pretty serious experimental treatments among other things, and I got to get out of here. Okay, I'm out of here, now I'm home. It's just so bizarre and so insensitive to what is truly going on in the country right now. So now I'm wondering, is there a plan of action as he walked inside? Were the doctors there waiting for him? Did they tell him where he can walk, where he can't walk, who he can mingle with, who he can't mingle with? Is his entire staff been secluded from him? Can he see his wife? Can he see his son? I mean, what's the game plan now? And where is he going to work from? I mean, still so many answers and so many questions about what happens next. But boy, the message he sent was, this was kind of no big deal, and I'm home now, and talk to you soon.
And John Santucci, I want to bring you in to kind of piggyback off of that notion. Of course, before the presidency, many knew him as a reality TV star. And again, here we are seeing him as this master TV man. It appeared that he didn't have his mask on. You had a better vantage point than I did.
Yeah, well, a couple things. One, Donald Trump, for all of his life, for all 74 years, has viewed every day of his life as a television episode. He believes that it's constantly got to have something that keeps you on the edge of your seat. I thought seeing Marine One touching down, iconic, the flags, the sunset, I thought that was a nice TV moment. I think him going up the stairs was that TV moment to see, I'm strong, I've got this. But then to see him standing on the Truman balcony without a mask, Lindsay, he definitely was not wearing a mask. What were they thinking? I'm honestly just listening to Kira talk about it too, and my jaw is on the floor. The fact that we are talking about being safe, being careful, the fact that he still has it, the fact that he has to go back now and allegedly quarantine, what are they thinking? What are they doing? And it plays right into the narrative that I have heard all throughout the last several days from sources close to his family, sources in the White House. They were freaked out about what this was going to look like upon his return. Folks, nothing's going to change. I mean, that's the headline that just sprung out to me. It's going to be business as usual. I mean, all the things they put out today about how they've reshaped the diplomatic room and the map room to be a socially distant workspace for the president. Good luck with that. I just don't see that happening now. I mean, he proved it to us right there in 2 seconds. And to Kira's point, Donald Trump showing empathy does not happen. And I've followed him for 5.5 years. I have lived and breathed everything Donald Trump has done. I have only seen Donald Trump show empathy once. It was in New Hampshire, speaking to the father of a child who died of a drug overdose. And the president, then candidate Trump, spoke about his deceased brother, Fred, who had a substance abuse problem, died of alcoholism. And it was the first moment that I could actually say I saw the man's heart. To think that he put out a video saying, I get it, I went to school, I learned it firsthand now with COVID, I get it, I feel it. To see what he has said today on Twitter, to see what he just did, he doesn't get it.
John, really I just want to interrupt just for a second, because we're just seeing the actual video of President Trump as he was climbing the steps going back into the White House. Were you surprised? Because it seemed like there was this expectation that he was going to stop and address reporters, whether it was outside of the hospital or once he returned back to the White House. Is that the Trump that you know? And oh, here we go. We actually can see the video of him take off his mask. Puts it in his pocket as he stands there kind of for the photo op with the flags behind him. As you said, it's a very nice image, but also is this contrary to the president that you know who normally would take advantage of microphones and reporters?
100%. I mean, you would think he'd want to say something, react, even if not take questions, at least make a statement and walk away. But again, Lindsay, let's just talk about that video that we just saw. That was an okay moment. That was a really good moment, actually. I mean, he lands, he's got the mask on. He's, you could argue he's not taking questions because he's keeping distance from everybody, But then to take the mask off up there, it's like, oh, okay, I'm good now. I'm home, whatever. And that's just not the point. He's going to walk into that residence right now. Listen, Lindsay, that's not like my house or yours, right? We have our spouses. We both have children. We would be careful. He's got that too, but he's also got a resident staff around him.
Correct.
I mean, we learned that the staff in the residence, 2 of them tested positive weeks ago, and they kept their distance from the first family, purposely not to get them infected. What does that mean for the resident staff in that White House right now? Is that fair? I mean, I hate to use that word, but I don't know what is a better reaction at this point in time.
We just saw that salute from the president, again, maskless. Matthew Dowd is certainly playing to his base here. But let's talk about the risk versus reward and this moment of him standing there again, just gave that salute for the photo op without a mask.
Well, at first, the problem with the base strategy, which is what he's been doing for 3.5 years, is his base is around 40 or 42%. What that gets you is a landslide loss, if that's all you have. And so, as I said, and everyone has said, is this reckless, irresponsible behavior that the president has, we've noted from the very beginning, as we've heard from February in the Bob Woodward tapes, that he wanted to downplay this, and it caught up with him at the White House, and all of us thought, okay, maybe this is a moment where he's going to actually admit to something and say, I've learned, I've got it, I'm going to change. My guess is what he does. I mean, I've actually, I've advised a president before, never this type of president, but a president before, I'm not surprised that he didn't say anything. Because I think he and his staff know he needs a controlled environment before he says something else. So what I would guess is going to happen is sometime in the next 24 hours, they're going to announce a presidential speech from the residency where the president's going to say something and try to come up with something about what he learned and the great service and we can do this. He's going to do it in a very set speech where he can control every word and he's not interrupted by questions and he knows he can go through it for 10 or 15 minutes. That is my guess, is what we're going to see next from the White House, is a set speech of where he says, here's what I learned while I was at, Walter Reed and sick at this time. The problem is every single action that he's done with himself for 3.5 years, but actually for the last 3.5 days, have been counter to the message that he actually needs to have.
Terry Moran, want to bring you in for your reaction to seeing the president there giving that salute maskless.
Well, I had a slightly different reaction. He's home. He's up on a balcony, for appearances' sake and for setting a good example and best practices, probably keep it on. But he is running for re-election, and, he probably wasn't endangering anyone up there. The real problem, though, is, as John and others have pointed out, there's a whole staff of people in there who it's their job to take care of the President of the United States and his family. And the president is infectious right now. And how careful is he going to be? This notion that this man, who we've come to know so well because he wants us to, he shares so much of himself, would say, I'm sorry, I had it wrong. I made a mistake. Now I understand. And I'm going to be really careful about how I go about my business as long as I'm contagious. I'm going to follow all the guidelines. I'm going to do everything right. That's just not Donald Trump. And we've come to know that. And I think that what we're looking at now is a man hoisted by his own petard. This is a guy who decided that, as in many tough situations in his life, he could kind of work and weasel and talk his way around it. Every once in a while, the bankruptcy court caught up with him, but he had a charmed life in many, many ways. If you look at those tax returns that the New York Times got a hold of, he's had a rough go of it financially with a couple of rescues. The Apprentice was a great stroke of luck. And so this is something, though, this act of God in some ways that he cannot get out of. And he is incapable at his age and given his character, of changing his approach. And the American people will render a judgment on that. As Matt points out, they are. And if polls are any indication, it is a negative judgment.
Terry Moran, our thanks to you. Let's bring in Dr. Todd Ellerin once again. And Doctor, the president has just gotten back to the White House. We'll see the video again of him standing there. This is a replay. And this distinction is likely an important one. You know, the president was going back home to a house like you and I have, as opposed to a White House with 24/7 medical care available. Would he likely still be in a hospital tonight if he weren't going back to this facility with world-class 24-hour round-the-clock help?
It's an important question, Lindsay. I mean, I think, as you just mentioned, the White House is not a normal home. It has round-the-clock care and medical providers that can care for him and able to monitor his vital signs and draw lab tests. So it's quite possible that if he weren't going back to the White House, that he may stay in the hospital. Again, you know, I'm not there. I'm not one of the, Walter Reed medical team. So it's hard to know exactly. I don't believe he had severe or critical illness. I think it's probably more in the mild to moderate end. The fact that he got dexamethasone, that steroid, really takes him out of the mild range. I think his providers must have thought that it's more than mild illness. So, I think what's important though now, I just want to reiterate, he is in a period where he is contagious. We think that patients are contagious for 2 days before the onset of symptoms to at least a week after the onset of symptoms. And the CDC wants patients who are positive to isolate for at least 10 days. By the way, it's not just 10 days and you're off isolation. It's 10 days in significant clinical improvement. He can infect patients right now, and his staff around him, his family members. He needs to mask as much as possible. We also have close to 50,000 cases a day. And as the weather gets colder, the reproductive number of this virus increases. What that means is the virus is going to be much less forgiving than it was over the summer. And we know it wasn't forgiving over the summer. So we are in a critical time right now. We need national leadership to help us change the course of our pandemic playbook.
As you're well aware, Doctor, it's said that 80% of Americans don't actually ever have to go to the hospital who come down with coronavirus. Do you get the sense, and of course you weren't treating the president directly, but do you get the sense from what you've gleaned from the information that has been reported that he was part of the 20% of the population that needed to go to the hospital, or do you believe that this was all out of precaution?
I do think we heard his oxygen saturation dropped on 2 occasions at least. And he's a male, he's elderly in the 70s, and his BMI is over 30. So that puts him in an obese range. Those 3 things are markers for more severe disease. So I believe that it was the right move to switch him from the White House to Walter Reed Medical Center. Let's face it, Walter Reed has had more experience treating COVID patients than the White House. So I think that was a prudent decision.
What would be the main thing that you'd be looking for as a warning sign as he settles back in at the White House?
So this is such a tricky virus. It hits multiple different parts of our body. I think the most important thing to start with is his breathing. I mean, this isn't just like the flu where it only hits the lungs, but we do have to monitor his oxygen saturation closely. Why is that relevant? Because what's strange about this virus is, and I've seen this with many patients, where they can look deceptively well. I've seen patients in our emergency department actually texting on their phone. We check their O2 sats and it's in the 80s or sometimes even the 70s. That's dangerously low. So while you can look well, you can quickly fall off that cliff with oxygen saturations that low. So that's one thing we want to look at. But then we have to make sure that he's not having clotting. When you have COVID-19, you have the ability to form clots in different parts of your body. Kidney and liver function, those are things that we have to watch, not just because of COVID-19, but also because some of the therapeutics. So there's a lot to monitor. He is not out of the woods yet. I'm happy to hear that he's gone back to the White House, but at the same time, these next few days are going to be very important to watch him closely and see what unravels.
Some of the viewers have been asking this primary question, and I wanted to pose it to you, basically suggesting that if the average American had the same kind of access to the rapid tests that the president was taking daily, or the same medication that President Trump is receiving currently still, would we have fewer deaths as a nation?
It's such an important question. I mean, look, testing more broadly is critical. Yes, we need more access to testing, because if we could test every person every day, then we would be able to take those positive patients or individuals out of circulation, isolate them, quarantine their close contacts, and you know what happens. Case counts go down. We've seen that because the shelter in place is sort of when you don't have testing, when you can't test as broadly, when you have too many cases, when you exceed hospital capacity, you have no choice but to force people to shelter in place. But as far as the therapeutics are concerned, Lindsay, I think that it's true. This triple cocktail he got is very unusual. The dexamethasone, that's standard of care for severe and critically ill patients. The remdesivir is a standard of care in the United States for those patients who are hospitalized and symptomatic with COVID-19. But that monoclonal antibody cocktail, that's rarely given to patients. Why? Because it's only in phase 2 trials right now. It's been only given to over 200 patients. So far, the data looks promising with faster clinical recovery and decreasing in viral load, but we still can't say whether or not that works. We have to have larger phase 3 trials inform us of that. So for that cocktail, that really has to be done on an individual basis.
Any side effects on those drugs that you'd be concerned about?
So with remdesivir, we want to look at the liver tests closely. We have to modify it if you have any kidney issues, the dose that you give. With the monoclonal antibodies, the good news is those are generally safe. And in the phase 2 trials of this particular cocktail, we haven't really seen significant serious adverse events. And then as far as dexamethasone is concerned, certainly this is a steroid. So steroids absolutely can increase your blood glucose level, almost like diabetics can have. So you can have uncontrolled glucose levels. It can cause you to have some mania, or it can make you feel actually better than you are. So sometimes it can mask signs or symptoms of illness. But there's no question that in patients with severe or critically ill COVID-19, that it has saved lives. Now, in President Trump's case, he unlikely had severe or critical illness. He probably had more moderate. So the risk-benefit ratio, I think, was probably a little tougher for the medical team to make. But again, I'm not on that medical team, so I don't want to look too far into that.
From a medical perspective, would you say that it's dangerous for the president to spread the message, don't be afraid of COVID, don't let it dominate your life, as we saw in his tweet earlier today?
What I want to see, and what's most important right now, is for him to come out and lead by example. Right now, by leading by example, he has to stay isolated. I'm actually happy that he didn't say any words today, because maybe the point is that he doesn't want to emit any infectious particles. That's at least what I want to think. And so, until he gets clearance from his medical team, and that has to be at a minimum of 10 days after the onset of his symptoms, then at that point, I think whatever he wants to do is reasonable, as long as he has public health interests first. Masking is important. It's important that he sets that example, because there are many people that are looking up to him to do what's right. And we know that masking reduces transmission, washing your hands, physically distancing. These are the examples that he can set that may be able to help change the course of COVID-19 in the United States.
Dr. Ellerin, thank you so much. And joining us now is Delaware Senator Chris Coons, who's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Coons also attended the presidential debate last week in Ohio. Thanks so much, Senator, for your time.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's great to be on with you.
I have to ask you about the president leaving the hospital and that image that we've been showing our viewers of the maskless president outside of the White House. What was your first reaction in seeing that?
My first reaction is the president doesn't get it. I am glad if he and the First Lady are on the road to recovery. But frankly, his tweet, I think it was last night, that he's gone to school on this pandemic and he now understands COVID-19 and that folks should not worry about it, is completely dispelled by his ignoring CDC and other public health official advice to wear a mask, to socially distance, to wash your hands, to avoid needlessly infecting others. I am concerned, frankly, that Lindsey Graham is barreling ahead with confirmation hearings in the Senate next week for Judge Barrett, which would require all of us to return for a hearing and a vote without a clear plan in place. I think he's doing this in no small part because of the bad example that President Trump is setting of disregarding public health advice.
Is it your opinion that the president should have stayed at Walter Reed, considering that it's still believed, as we just heard Dr. Ellerin say, that he's contagious?
Well, he was either contagious at the debate in Cleveland, where I was in the second row of the audience, and Vice President Biden, former Vice President Biden, was just a few feet away from him while he raised his voice for 90 minutes, or he's contagious now. Either way, it's been reckless and irresponsible. I do think he should stay where he can best be cared for. He is getting world-class care. He's getting experimental drugs, a therapeutic cocktail, and some very strong steroids that are making him feel better and may allow him to recover quickly. But I'll remind you, this is the same president who's in the middle of supporting a case to take away health care protections from more than 100 million Americans.
And you are, of course, as you just mentioned, a surrogate for Joe Biden, one of his earliest supporters on the trail. Have you talked with the former vice president since the debate last week? And how concerned are you that the president might have exposed potentially Biden to COVID, even though I believe it's 2 tests at this point that Biden has taken and both have come back negative?
I am relieved that both Joe and Jill Biden have tested negative. I also was tested afterwards, as were several of the members of the House and other supporters of the vice president who traveled with us. But frankly, it's just another reminder of the stark differences between how Joe Biden has conducted himself and his campaign and how Donald Trump has. President Trump has packed thousands of his supporters into rallies in city after city without masks, without social distancing. Frankly, even in that Rose Garden ceremony in which Judge Barrett was nominated for the Supreme Court, there was row after row of folks packed closely together where apparently many of them either didn't wear a mask, didn't take a test beforehand, or both. In contrast, former Vice President Biden has conducted himself responsibly. He hasn't put either the general public or the folks who provide him with security and support at risk. That shows a real difference in terms of their compassion for others and how they would lead us out of this pandemic. That's why I'm supporting Joe Biden.
Have you been satisfied with the medical answers that we've been hearing from the president's doctors on his condition and his treatment?
Well, it was striking how quickly the press was able to expose the president's physician for having made willful misstatements about whether the president was or wasn't on oxygen. I don't think they've been fully transparent, and I really question whether returning to the White House is the best course of treatment, given the remarkable resources they have at Walter Reed. But frankly, you know, at the end of the day, what matters is the treatment and care 7 million infected Americans have been able to get. 205,000 of them have died so far. That is an incredible number of families that have had to grieve the loss of a loved one, people who often died alone, in pain, isolated, and without the best state-of-the-art medical care.
Turning to the Senate now, Mitch McConnell announced the Senate will not convene until October 19th after 3 Republican senators tested positive for COVID-19. Half of the chamber is 65 or older. Does there need to be mandated testing before anyone can safely return?
Yes. The U.S. Senate is the definition of a super spreader event. You've got 100 people, as you say, many of them senior citizens. I suspect virtually all of us with pre-existing conditions, flying or traveling by train or car from all over the United States, gathering in a small chamber where we're often there for long periods of time, voting, speaking. Frankly, we should not be returning to the Senate. We should not be having confirmation hearings for Judge Barrett. until every senator and our staff have access to rapid testing and to high-quality PPE and to state-of-the-art care. I frankly think we should be delaying the confirmation hearings and vote on Judge Barrett as a result.
So you just pretty much touched on this, but, as you know, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Lindsey Graham, announced today that he plans to move forward with the Supreme Court confirmation process 1 week from today. That's despite 2 committee members testing positive for coronavirus. Political fight aside, do you think it's at all possible that these hearings could be held safely or perhaps with remote participation, as so many hearings have been held in recent months?
Well, the only way to do this really safely and to have those members participate is to do a confirmation hearing for a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court by Zoom or by remote means. I'll remind you, Chairman Graham has already accelerated the process beyond any modern precedent in terms of how quickly this is being done and how close to an election that's already underway. Millions of Americans have already voted in more than half the states. There's no precedent for a confirmation hearing this close to an election that's underway. And I frankly struggle to see how we can have the sort of full and fair hearing that we ought to be having before Judge Barrett is voted on for a lifetime position to the Supreme Court.
And, Senator, before you go, just want to get a sense, can you and your Democratic colleagues do anything at all at this point to stop this process from going forward?
Appealing to the American public, appealing to the conscience of our Republican colleagues was all we had available to us before the rules of the committee allow the chairman to proceed without a quorum. So frankly, at this point, reminding Americans what's on the line, why President Trump nominated this judge who's committed to overturning the Affordable Care Act. There is a hearing a week after the election where he wants her seated to be the deciding vote in overturning the constitutionality of a law that protects a majority of Americans who have pre-existing conditions. So I think the only tool we've got at our disposal is persuasion, reminding Americans what's at stake in a pandemic.
The power of persuasion. Senator Coons, our thanks to you for your time.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Still ahead here on Prime, President Trump's son Eric deposed under oath by the New York State Attorney General's office. We'll tell you why. While COVID cases continue to surge in the United States, in other parts of the globe, a different reality. Tonight, we speak with the man who coordinates the pandemic response across Africa. Why has that continent handled the virus far better than we have? But first, our tweet of the day, the president's announcement about heading back to the White House and his proclamation that we have nothing to fear from COVID, despite hundreds more of Americans dying today alone. We'll have a recap of the president's return to the White House when we come back.
Most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Your mom said, comb your hair. Your dad told you, smarten up. Your dog is judging you right now. And your best friend just called you crazy. We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. Now imagine getting your news like that. No bull, no spin, just give it to me straight. Straightforward news, straight to the heart of the story. ABC News, straightforward.
The Americans here on the ground and the Iraqis, 18,000 tons. Patatas. Ismail? David.
Over ground zero from Hurricane Michael.
You can see just home after home.
David, nice to meet you.
This was your view.
My favorite view.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, with so much on the line, ABC News, America's #1 news, is right there for you live on Hulu with stories of strength, stories of hope. Because now, when it matters most,
Hulu has live news.
Hulu has live news.
Hulu has live news. And that news is ABC News.
ABC News Live on Hulu.
ABC News Live on Hulu.
Watch the news you need.
Thanks so much for streaming with us.
Streaming to all Hulu subscribers right now.
Welcome to Disney Plus. Are you ready? Drop in and explore. These These are your worlds. Wherever and whenever you want them, you'll find them all here on Disney Plus.
The waters of the Outer Banks are unforgiving and full of riches for the fishermen who dare. The best of the Northern Fleet are heading south. The locals know where the giants lie. And if you thought the waters were unforgiving, wait until the battle begins. Wicked Tuna Outer Banks. New episodes Sundays at 9 on National Geographic.
President Trump departed Walter Reed Medical Center tonight, 3 nights after he arrived to get treated for COVID-19. The president set to return to a White House that is now its own COVID hotspot.
But then to take the mask off up there, it's like, oh, okay, I'm good now. I'm home, whatever. And that's just not the point.
Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany revealing she tested positive for the virus this morning. ABC News has learned at least 2 other White House staffers in the press office also got positive test results in recent days. But McEnany never quarantined as the CDC guidelines specify, even briefing the media yesterday after removing her mask. And sources tell ABC News McEnany was pulled from the president's trip to Bedminster, New Jersey last Thursday because of her proximity to top aide Hope Hicks, who also tested positive.
Our current best estimates tell us that about 10% of the global population may have been infected by this virus.
New York City facing a growing number of infections in hotspot neighborhoods across Brooklyn and Queens. The governor now announcing roughly 100 public schools will close on Tuesday.
The infection rate is going up. Beware the fall has been right.
This as the CDC updates its guidance once again on how COVID is spread, saying the virus can spread amongst people who are more than 6 feet away or after an infected person has left the room. 33 states and Puerto Rico reporting rising case totals.
Eric Trump is testifying today.
Eric Trump is sitting for a deposition as part of an investigation by the New York Attorney General's office into whether the Trump Organization improperly inflated the value of certain assets to get loans or tax benefits. President Trump's son was ordered to appear by Wednesday after a judge rejected his attempt to delay the deposition until after Election Day. Eric Trump has called the investigation an anti-Trump fishing expedition. The Attorney General's office is scrutinizing at least 4 properties and is taking Eric Trump's testimony virtually.
As the Supreme Court starts its new term, Chief Justice John Roberts paid tribute to the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who died last month.
Justice Ginsburg's contributions as advocate, jurist, and citizen are immeasurable. We at the court will remember her as a dear friend and a treasured colleague.
The justices are still working remotely because of the pandemic. Senate Republicans are moving quickly to confirm President Trump's nominee to replace Ginsburg, Amy Coney Barrett. But Democrats argue that Ginsburg's replacement should be chosen by whomever wins the presidential election. Dramatic high-rise rescue in Manhattan. 2 window washers clinging to a dangling scaffold.
You got a scaffold hanging on the side, 2 guys attached to a kite.
Dangerously dangling right around the 20th floor of this office building in Lower Manhattan.
This cannot be done by just one company, and one company only. But overall, this went very, very well.
Firefighters pulled one of 2 workers into the building.
That was about 40 minutes from inception to under control.
40 terrifying minutes. The men both did have on their safety harnesses, and firefighters knew exactly what to do. This is something they trained for all the time, and carried out a safe rescue.
Regal Cinemas confirms it's once again closing its doors.
You can kind of blame 007.
The world's moved on, Commander Bond.
Last week's decision to move the 25th James Bond movie to next year was the final nail in the coffin for Cineworld, operator of Regal Cinemas, the second largest chain in the U.S. Cineworld temporarily closing theaters in the U.S. and U.K., saying in a statement that with major markets including New York still closed, and without a new pipeline of movies from Hollywood studios, Cineworld just can't continue to operate right now. Shares of the company's stock were down as much as 47% Monday, and the move will affect approximately 45,000 jobs.
Welcome back. 210,000 dead Americans, hundreds losing their fight with the virus just today alone. Yet the president boldly downplayed the threat, proclaiming in a tweet, "Don't be afraid of COVID. Don't let it dominate your life. We have developed under the Trump administration some really great drugs and knowledge." And this evening, the president of the United States left Walter Reed, heading back to the White House, even though his own doctor said he may not entirely be out of the woods just yet. At least 17 people linked to the White House now infected. The press secretary announcing she was one of 3 cases at the White House today alone. ABC's chief White House correspondent Jonathan Karl has the latest.
After receiving some of the most advanced medical care in the world for 3 nights, including experimental treatments usually reserved for the most serious COVID cases, President Trump tweeted today that he is heading back to the White House, telling Americans, "Don't be afraid of COVID. Don't let it dominate your life." He added, "I feel better than I did 20 years ago." The president's doctor says he gave the all clear to go home.
Though he may not entirely be out of the woods yet, the team and I agree that all our evaluations, and most importantly, his clinical status, support the president's safe return home, where he'll be surrounded by world-class medical care 24/7.
So how is the president really doing? It's been nearly impossible to discern amidst a series of false or conflicting statements from the White House and the president's physician, Dr. Sean Conley, over the past 4 days. Once again today, Dr. Conley refused to answer basic questions about the president's health.
Or any inflammation in his lungs at all?
So we've done routine standard imaging. I'm just not at liberty to discuss.
On Saturday, Dr. Conley insisted the president was doing just fine.
This morning, the president is doing very well. The team and I are extremely happy with the progress the president has made.
He falsely told reporters the president had not been given oxygen, when in fact he had been given it twice.
Yesterday and today, he was not on oxygen. None at this moment. Yeah, and yesterday with the team, while we were all here, he was not on oxygen.
Minutes after that briefing ended, White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows pulled reporters off to the side.
If we can go off the record with some of y'all and get away from the cameras.
Sure.
Okay.
Meadows then directly contradicted the doctor, saying, quote, "The president's vitals over the last 24 hours were very concerning, and the next 48 hours will be critical in terms of his care. We are still not on a clear path to a full recovery." Sunday, as Meadows looked on, his head in his hands, Dr. Conley admitted he had not told the truth about whether the president had been given oxygen. He acknowledged he was putting a positive spin on everything to please the patient.
I was trying to reflect the upbeat attitude that the team, the president, that his course of illness has had. I didn't want to give any information that might steer the course of illness in another direction, and in doing so, it came off that we were trying to hide something, which wasn't necessarily true, so here I have it.
Over the course of his hospitalization, the president staged a series of photo ops designed to project strength and to prove he was still on the job. In this photo, the president appears to be signing his name to a blank piece of paper. Yesterday, the president had the Secret Service drive him outside the hospital so he could wave to the cameras and to his supporters, possibly exposing the agents riding along with him to the virus. The move outraged Dr. James Phillips, an attending doctor at Walter Reed, who tweeted all those agents must now quarantine, adding they might get sick, they might die for political theater. Commanded by Trump to put their lives at risk for theater. This is insanity. Dr. Phillips appeared today on GMA.
I don't know what the benefits of this political stunt were, but I do know what the risks were. And my concern is that perhaps the Secret Service agents that were inside don't know the full risk of what they were up against there and what the real threats were.
Tonight, the president returns to a White House thrown into chaos by COVID-19. Each day, more staffers getting sick. Today, Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany announced she too has tested positive for the virus. For days, she has been speaking to reporters without wearing a mask, even though she has had extensive contact with both the president and with Hope Hicks, who tested positive last Thursday. 2 of McEnany's aides in the White House press office have also tested positive. In total, 18 people who were around the White House and President Trump now have COVID-19. 11 of them attended the Rose Garden ceremony where the president announced his Supreme Court pick. Others, including Hicks, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, and Trump campaign manager Bill Stepien, attended a debate prep meeting at the White House. The president's daughter, Ivanka Trump, has tested negative. At the debate in Cleveland, she didn't wear a mask. Over the weekend, she was recorded by the Daily Mail jogging with her husband, Jared Kushner, in their Washington neighborhood, both now wearing face coverings. Multiple sources tell ABC News there is now what one person close to the president called a full-blown freakout among the White House staff. New York Times reporter Michael Shear, who tested positive after flying on Air Force One a week ago Saturday, says no one has reached out to him to trace his possible contacts.
White House. Nobody from the White House has said boo and asked anything about where I was or who I talked to or who else I might have infected.
There are also serious questions about why the president traveled to a fundraiser in New Jersey on Thursday after learning Hope Hicks had the virus. New Jersey officials are now tracing the contacts of more than 200 people who were there with the president. Sources tell ABC News the president tested positive shortly after he returned from that trip. But hours later, he told Sean Hannity he was still waiting on results.
So I just went for a test, and we'll see what happens. I mean, who knows?
Today, his doctor refused to say when the president last tested negative for the virus.
I don't want to go backwards.
As for the president, 7 months into a crisis that has unfolded on his watch, he now says personal experience has taught him a lot about a disease that has killed more than 210,000 Americans.
It's been a very interesting journey. I learned a lot about COVID. I learned it by really going to school. This is the real school. This isn't the let's read the book school. And I get it, and I understand it, and it's a very interesting thing, and I'm going to be letting you know about it.
Back at the White House, the president will be confined to the residence, at least for a period of time. That means no Oval Office, no West Wing, at least for a while. But the White House wants us to know, insist that he will be working. The Trump campaign is also sending that message, saying the president has every intention to participate in the next presidential debate with Joe Biden. Although, Lindsay, they did not rule out the possibility that that could be a virtual debate. So very much we will have to wait and see what happens with that. Lindsay?
Jonathan Karl, our thanks to you. And as the president recovers now in Washington, his illness comes with just 29 days until the final votes are cast on Election Day. And Joe Biden was on the campaign trail today in the battleground state of Florida, making the response to the pandemic the centerpiece of his pitch to voters. ABC's Mary Bruce now with how the president's COVID diagnosis is shaking up the race for the White House.
Tonight, with the president back at the White House, Joe Biden says he's glad he's recovering, but is making it clear the nation still hasn't recovered from this pandemic.
I hope the president's recovery is swift and successful, but our nation's COVID crisis is far, far from over. Now that he's busy tweeting campaign messages, I would ask him to do this. Listen to the scientists. Support masks.
Biden in the key battleground state of Florida today, wearing a mask throughout his socially distanced events. The latest state polling shows him up 5 points over President Trump.
As you all know, and quite frankly, if we win Florida, you've won. You flat won.
Last night, we learned that Biden has tested negative again after his campaign said they will now reveal the results of every test he takes. The Trump campaign is trying to forge ahead, keeping up as many events as possible, saying it is the president's intention to debate on October 15th, exactly 2 weeks from his positive test. His physician asked if it was safe for the president to resume campaigning.
As far as travel goes, we'll see.
Biden says the decision to debate should be up to the medical experts. His wife today pulling him away from reporters, reminding him to keep his distance.
I'm sorry. If the scientists say that it's safe and the distances are safe, then I think that's fine.
Despite health concerns, the vice presidential face-off between Kamala Harris and Mike Pence is still on for Wednesday. But now, at the request of the Biden-Harris team, the candidates will be 13 feet apart, separated by plexiglass. Pence continues to test negative.
And we're looking very much forward to the vice presidential debate.
And after some in the audience at last week's debate, including the president's family, flouted the rules by not wearing masks, this time anyone without a mask will be escorted out. And there, of course, will be new urgency to this debate on Wednesday night with the president's diagnosis and with Joe Biden possibly becoming the nation's oldest president if elected. Americans are now looking for some reassurance that the vice president is ready to step in if needed. Lindsay.
Our thanks to you, Mary. And this historic storm season in the Atlantic continues. And now we're tracking two more storms. Tropical storm Gamma has already battered the Cancun region, is now heading into the Gulf. But the big concern is Delta. It could be heading for the U.S. coast and impact regions already hard hit by the record-setting season. Ginger, what do we need to know?
Yeah, Lindsay, it's kind of unbelievable to think that we could see our 10th landfalling hurricane of the season. That's right, this season could make the record books again. It's been the earliest, the most activity this early, all of those things. But now, if we get a 10th landfalling, we haven't done that in recorded history. So the name would be Delta. It's already moving and will rapidly intensify the next couple of days. How it interacts with what's left of Gamma, which already impacted Cancun and Cozumel over the weekend. They could get some more again. They're on hurricane watch again. So is Western Cuba, Cayman Islands on tropical storm warning. Here's what will happen. The next couple of days, you're going to hear, oh my goodness, this thing went into a monster, and it will. There are some of the warmest waters on planet Earth right now that it has to fuel off of, and not a whole lot of wind shear to kill it. However, once it makes its interaction with what's left of Gamma, and that that high pressure system that drives these things starts to back up into it, it will turn north. And where it turns north is going to have a huge impact on who gets the most or the brunt of the storm. But if anybody from, say, Port Arthur and Beaumont over to Cameron and Lake Charles, New Orleans, Mobile, Panama City, even Tallahassee, I want everybody along that coast to be prepared. And I say that because we're still 5 days out. There is a margin of error about 200 miles on either side of that track that we need to watch for. I promise you we will keep updating you with the impacts as we get closer to the kickoff for this one, Delta, by the weekend. Lindsay.
All right, our thanks to you, Ginger. And still ahead, our conversation with the head of Africa's CDC, how so many African nations have contained the virus while we have failed. Stay with us.
In times like these, the news-making events happen here. ABC News.
President Trump meeting face-to-face with one of the world's most brutal dictators, Kim Jong-un.
The president.
Do you trust him? I do trust him, yeah. I think he trusts me, and I trust him.
Ivanka Trump.
I have to ask you about your emails. Your father had taken Hillary Clinton to task for this.
There just is no equivalency.
So the idea of lock her up doesn't apply to you?
No.
Comey.
How strange is it for you to sit here and compare the president to a mob boss?
Very strange. Michelle Obama.
What do you wish you could tell your pre-White House self?
Whew. Melania Trump.
Do you think there's still people there that he can't trust?
Yes.
Still working now?
Yes.
Michael Cohen.
So he's still lying?
Yes.
It's a big statement.
And now, in a year with so much on the line, we're right there.
Good evening tonight from Washington, a very busy news night.
America's #1 news source, ABC News, straightforward.
We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. No bull, no spin. Now imagine getting your news like that. Just give it to me straight. ABC News, straightforward.
Another week in America, a country facing a new test now.
The Wuhan airport, almost no one here.
The last flight out of Rome.
This is the nursing home just outside Seattle. Dozens of people were just rushed off this cruise ship.
This is ground zero. It is shut down.
Another ambulance just pulled out.
Now they're headed to the hospital.
Time is of the essence.
You can see the ship behind me.
This is the first time tests have been done here.
Morning, afternoon, evening, late night, 24/7. ABC News, there for you.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. Start Here, free on Apple Podcasts.
We turn now to the COVID-19 fight in Africa and a pandemic response that's been widely praised. On a continent of 1.3 billion people, the countries of the African Union together report 1.5 million COVID cases and close to 37,000 COVID-related deaths, which means that per capita, these nations appear to be faring much better than the United States. And tonight we bring in the man who's leading Africa's pandemic response, Dr. John Kennesong, director of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. He's also the World Health Organization's Special Envoy for Africa on COVID-19 and winner of the Gates Foundation's 2020 Goalkeeper Award. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
So let's start with the early days of this pandemic. Some initially projected that a shortage of first responders and equipment would cause COVID-19 just to ravage the continent of Africa and that the effects could be catastrophic. Describe for us the early days in February, the meetings with African country leaders and the calls to action.
I think the concerns during the early days of the pandemic were genuine. Because when we saw what was going on in China, in Europe, and the United States, the continent was shaking, and for several reasons. Because our health systems are weak, we don't have sufficient healthcare workers. But what we did was simple: that we, instead of waiting for the pandemic to arrive, we started preparing actively. And if you recall, the first cases of COVID-19 were reported in Egypt on February 14. And 1 week later, on February 22nd, the Africa CDC convened a meeting of all ministers of health that was chaired by the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Chairperson Moussa Faki. And that was an important meeting because it allowed all of us to be on the same page and have a common understanding of how to prepare. And we agreed that it needed total cooperation, collaboration, coordination of our efforts in order to win the battle against COVID-19. So those early preparations, recognizing the threat as a common threat for the continent, were extremely valuable.
And I know you've said that leadership in countries like Zimbabwe called COVID-19 an existential threat before they even had a single case. As you've watched America struggle with COVID with more deaths than any other country, what do you see as the biggest difference between our response and many of the African nations?
I think I can speak more on for the response on the continent because it has been leadership at multiple layers. I mean, first of all, the African Union Commission, led by President Cyril Ramaphosa, in his capacity as the chair of the African Union, has been playing a very important role in bringing head of states together to work with Africa CDC to coordinate the strategy. I think that is extremely important. The second layer of leadership was the bold measures that each country took in recognition of the threat, the economic threat, the security threat that the disease poses. And so many countries, as indicated, went into aggressive lockdown measures very early on. I think those were very aggressive measures and very courageous because it had a very significant impact on the economies. The third thing to recognize is the uniformity in messaging. And the message was clear. We have never wavered with the message. We started using masks across the continent before even WHO made it mandatory. I think that we've never contested that. Where the recognition that we had to social distance was there, and the recognition that we had shortage of test kits, but it required that we ram that up very quickly was also very important. So I think the coordinated messaging to the community has been a critical factor in our fight against COVID-19. And lastly, the engagement of the community. The COVID infections are in the community. We need total community cooperation, total community collaboration in order to win the fight. And I think that's what we have been doing.
Africa also happens to have the youngest population of any region on Earth, with a median age around 19 years old. Do you think that the youth on the continent of Africa has been significant in Africa's relatively low fatality rate from COVID-19?
I think so, and this is based on evidence. If you look at our total numbers, which today we're reporting about 1.5 million cases, and of those 1.2 million cases have recovered. And if you look at the median age, as you stated, on the continent is around 19 years compared to about 43 years in Europe. And we know that the fatality of this infection tends to increase with age as well. So I think that has played a role.
You know, American leadership here has often said that we have more cases because we have more testing here. How confident are you that you're actually getting reliable data on COVID cases and deaths throughout the continent of Africa, particularly where testing capacity might be limited?
Our testing capacity was challenged early on in the infection or pandemic. And also remember that we had a delayed infection. I think you're right. By early June, our testing numbers were low. As we speak today, the continent has tested about 15 million people, and that is a significant increase. Now, are we missing cases? Of course, we are missing cases out there. Absolutely. This is a virus that is spreading very fast. You know, from a cultural and sociological context, Africans, they attach a lot of value to deaths. And if that was happening, we would hear from the community. And we have been actively looking for such events across multiple countries. And we don't see, there is no evidence for large-scale deaths.
I think that what I'm hearing, the constant theme in what you're saying is that you largely have been successful in Africa because the leadership acted early and took the virus seriously. At this point where we are in the United States, what lessons do you think that we might be able to learn from Africa's response to the pandemic, particularly in this moment as we're continuing to see COVID cases surging here in this country?
I believe from experience, which is still early, I think I want to be very clear that Africa, we are not yet out of the woods. I mean, we truly don't know where the trajectory of this virus will go, but we are pleased with where we see the evolution in terms of the constant and sustained decrease in number of new cases over the last couple of weeks. I think we are very pleased with that. But a couple of early lessons that we need to understand from this pandemic is that there is need for having a joint continental and coordinated strategy. I think that is extremely important. The second lesson that we are learning on the continent is the engagement of the community. This virus is circulating in the community without a strong community engagement, what I call the whole of society approach. It becomes very difficult to fight the virus. So there must be cohesion between the political leadership, the public health leadership, and the civil society and community leadership. I think that is extremely valuable there. I think the courage of saying we have to understand that the impact on the economy is because of this virus. And so we have to defeat the virus before we think of unlocking the economy is very important. So in other words, there have to be that fine balance between how soon do you want to ease the lockdown on the economy versus how much you want to devote in fighting the virus and making sure that the virus is defeated before you ease the lockdown on the economy.
Such helpful information and perspective. Dr. John Kennesaw, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
And before we go tonight, our image of the day. Bee Lumpkin cast her first vote way back in 1940, and the 102-year-old retired teacher continues to exercise her sacred right today, this time wearing full COVID PPE gear. Her message, if I can do it, so can you. We sure can be. Thank you so much for that important reminder. That is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us, and good night.